Hello, everybody. Welcome back to more yoga. I'm going to do my best to. I feel really inspired to start creating a series of videos that will be beneficial and supportive to deepening into your home sadhana. I'm going to cover a lot of material in these videos, and I'm going to break them apart into um, different segments so that you can dive in and review this material at your leisure. This is, of course, going to be supportive for those who have graduated from the Keepers of the Earth teacher training, because you have been introduced to many of these concepts and practices and techniques. And so if you haven't been through one of those programs and you're watching this video, then some of what I will be sharing might be foreign. But for those who have been practicing, have studied with me, have been through the training, then some of this material is going to be review. Of course, the thing that happens when the material is reviewed, sometimes after practicing for a period of time, is the material appears fresh, or there's a new insight, or there's a new understanding. And this is the process of the ever deepening path of yoga, that we can revisit some of the basic materials again and again and again and find new insights, new discoveries, new inspiration. Even though it's appears to be the same, there's a new level of perception and a new level of experience being had by the person who is studying, applying, and practicing the material. And so, yeah, I find that to be fascinating and worth noting, because, yeah, I think that these videos can be really helpful to watch in the initial stages of journeying out from graduating. Like, we just finished our 2025 cohort. And so now there's a new wave of graduates going out. And so they've inspired me to make some of these videos. Shout out to that crew from La Chispa. I know some of you are landing back home right now by the time I'm recording this video. And so, yeah, the intention of today's talk is to, one, introduce that so you know where these videos will be going, and begin by talking about, I think one of the first things that we're going to cover in the series is the process with asana. And so I'm going to go over some of the refinements in some of the basic postures that we've done in this video. And I'm going to use this opportunity to review like the universal alignment principles and some of the things dealing with the elemental model. And I feel like this will be a good place to begin with this series, because this view and this approach helps keep us really accountable to the way that we practice, to ensure that the way we practice is in alignment with the path of yoga. And so, yeah, I think I'm going to just get into a little bit of discussion, and I might offer a couple like workshopy pieces as we go along, so you can listen to this lecture while you're driving or whatever you're doing. But there's going to be some pieces that may involve you practicing with me to get it. And so, yeah, I think the first place that we can start is, of course, dropping in and thinking about the spine. And why do we emphasize the spine so much? Well, the spine is it's like in the metaphysical understanding of the spine is the ladder to heaven. We make our way up the spine, raising our energy and coming into higher and higher dimensions of consciousness, higher and higher planes of consciousness as we ascend the spinal column. And this is correlate. The correlate here is the chakra system and the elemental model. And so you are familiar with Lam, Vam, Ram, Yam, Hum, Om, the bija mantras of each of the chakras. And we work a lot with purifying these centers, because it is the belief of the yogis that in order to ascend into the ultimate goal of yoga, which happens when the crown is open, this is the moment of the individual merging with the universal. And so this is the goal and the point of the path of yoga, is to reach a state of consciousness that our experience is non-dual. Our experience is not one of separation and duality. And there's something to be said about that, what I just shared about the ultimate goal and the path of yoga leading us to that experience and that state of consciousness, that this can happen in micro moments, and that there's not necessarily a one and done moment, right? Like there's not like all of a sudden you reach that state of non-dual awareness and then you just abide there. Of course, there are examples of humans who, and masters, right? We consider these adepts or siddhas or sages, who reach that state of consciousness and attained enlightenment, like Buddha, for example, and abided in that state. They remained in that state of non-dual awareness. And so those are examples that we have historically. And I think it's important to mention that this also happens in micro moments for us, and that the path of yoga is one of gradual purification, to where we realize these states, or we have experiences of remembrance and experiences of non-dual awareness, experiences of self and other as not separate, or I and the universe, I and the cosmos as one consciousness. And we may have experiences of that, but it's difficult to sustain them, and the energy falls back down to lower vibratory planes and denser planes of consciousness. And so we work with the spine, because this path there's a physiological correlate to what we're describing, and there's a gradual step-by-step purification process as the energy starts to rise and ascend in us. And the impurities, which are any of the conditions that we have adopted and that have been imprinted upon us by our environment to lead us to where we are now, and any of the and all of the existing beliefs and ideas that we have about ourselves and other, that keep us separate and keep us limited. And so we're gradually working through the purification of all of those things, which are more or less densities, right? Density residue, psychic residue sticking to us, and especially obstructing the flow of energy in the spine and in the central column. And so the yogi takes a lot of puts a lot of attention and emphasis on this spine for that reason alone, that we understand that it is through and with the spine that we can work through these densities, and we can start to rise our energy to higher states. And not only can we rise them to higher states, but we can sustain those higher vibratory planes for longer and more consistently without falling back down. And so, as I said, this is a gradual step-by-step process, and it has to do with how the energy moves through the spine and the chakras. And so this is why the elemental model is so helpful to understand and to put into practice, because it holds us accountable to the goal of the path of yoga, that we gradually work through whatever is our obstruction, whatever is our limitation. And as we do this sincerely and honestly, right, with the principles of ahimsa and satya, and we're talking about the yamas and the niyamas now in the Yoga Sutras, the first two limbs of yoga, in the Ashtanga yoga path, the 8-limbed path of yoga leading to samadhi. The yamas and the niyamas exist because these are prerequisites, in order for us to have the right attitude to approach this work and to start to move away from, right, we want to be orienting on the right view of the path and orienting on where the path is taking us in order to get the most out of it. And we do that because this is a spiritual path, and we want it to remain true to what its power is, right? Like what its true potential is, as opposed to it becoming something akin to exercise. And so yeah, with the elemental model and the focus on the spine, we obviously have these we have the sounds, which are called the bija mantras. And the bija mantras are the seed sound, or the seed syllable. Bija means seed, mantra of each respective center, starting at the base, Muladhara chakra, with Lam, and then Vam at the sacrum, Svadhisthana, and Ram at Manipura, and Yam at Anahata, and Hum at Vishuddha, finally Om at the third eye. And what I'd like to kind of cover with you, in addition to that, so like we're talking about the elements in the spine and the emphasis on the spine, is this idea that we can develop our practice to help us at each of the subsequent levels. And so we may have a range of obstructions, right? Or a variety of impurities, which, like I was saying, these are densities in our field and are limiting our perception in a way. And we can work subsequently through each of them and systematically on each of those levels in order to holistically develop our mind, body, breath system and all of the levels and the layers of the bodies. Remember the koshas, we have the 5 koshas, the 5 layers of the body. And so using this perspective and having this view, sorry about that, guys. Using this perspective and having this view allows us to approach this work very systematically. And so the first thing that I want to say about that is, how do we sit? Okay? How do we sit? And why is it important to understand how do we sit? So you may remember from the training, if you're a recent graduate, and if not, then this will remind you. You may remember me talking about the importance of having coordination between the limbs and having a sort of a universal perspective of the body and a synchronization of the body and the breath, and especially a synchronization between the periphery, the arms and the legs, or the hands and the feet. And why that's important is because by engaging the periphery, by learning to engage the whole body, we open up space in the center. Okay, we start to develop with the stretching of the legs, for example, using the legs the way they are designed by planting the feet and using the feet and the legs to push into the earth. It opens up the base of the spine. And what is the base of the spine? Well, the tailbone represents the earth element, which is stability and grounding, and right, these things that we've discussed with Muladhara. And so using the legs and getting the legs to work, we start to build the foundation for the rise of the Kundalini, the rise of the evolutionary energy. But it can't, like, it's like building a foundation of a house. And I don't know if you knew this statistic, but in building projects, about 50% of the work is on the foundation. So that's a clue to help us orient to what we need to develop and what we need to work. And so developing the base, which we do through obviously many of the asanas that we work, but specifically with things like the stances, squatting, single leg work, and the warrior postures. These help us to plug into our root system and therefore open up the circulation patterns of the base, which allow us to sit with more firmness and ease. Remember, stira and sukham, the duality that we're working to understand that exists inside of us is also mirrored in the cosmos. And that there's an expansion of energy and a contraction of energy. Everything in the universe follows this pattern, and that in between the two, expansion and contraction, there's a maintenance, there's a middle point. And so what we're trying to do is find in our body where the energy is expanding, where it is contracting, and then find the middle, the space in between that. And doing this, especially by practicing it in our asanas, allows us to, when we arrive in a seated posture, to start to begin our pranayama, which is the fourth limb of yoga, right? We have the yamas, and the niyamas is the first two, and then our asanas are the third one, to prepare the body for the pranayama, which is the fourth limb. And that's the starting to master the life force. But the life force, if it's not grounded, if it doesn't have this base and the structure to hold it, it can remain scattered. And so what I'm referring to and what I'm talking about is this development of the base. And as I was sharing, I'm going to talk and start from this place. So like we emphasize the spine, we talk about the elemental model. Now we're going to talk about sitting. Okay. And so when it comes to sitting, there are classical yogic postures that we can adopt. And the most obvious one is the simple cross-legged posture. Right? This is the most obvious one. And what we're looking to do in a simple cross-legged posture, we have, of course, more advanced yogic postures, which siddhasana would be the heel. The heel is in the perineum. And a more advanced variation of this is that you bring the toes and you tuck the toes. Okay? Or you have the quintessential yogic posture, which is Padmasana. And what's happening now, once I've established myself in my asana, in my seat, is I've created a structure, a foundation from the base that allows the spine to literally rise like a stalk, right, out of a pot. And there's a buoyancy in the spine when the base is plugged in and solid, but the base starts in the feet, right, with the toes and the root. And so this root system, when I'm sitting, I want to be able to still circulate energy through my base. Okay. But in order to get the circulation patterns to work, in order for that energy to circulate in my base, I need to work my feet and my legs. Otherwise, I'm going to sit and I'll be fidgeting and I'll be, it won't be comfortable to sit. But we start at the foundation and we build the foundation. And this takes care of the earth. And when we take care of the earth, there's a stabilization of the body, which corresponds to a stabilization of the mind. And unless and until that happens, the withdrawal of our energy inward to contemplate higher or more refined states of consciousness is difficult or impossible. And so we obviously work all of these things systematically to prepare us for those gradual realizations. And so the first step is analyzing the seat. Okay. Taking note of what is the spine doing in our seated position. And one of the things we can do, if you want to do this with me, you can take your seat. It doesn't have to be Padmasana, although maybe you feel inclined to practice Padmasana, which is incredible. They say the best posture for seated pranayama and meditation. But the first thing we want to do is rest our hands on our knees and then pay attention to, starting with the top of the head, to bring the
the back of the skull slightly towards the crown of the head, which is going to drop the chin ever so slightly. And if we bring the back of the skull towards the crown of the head, then we start to bring the crown of the head directly on top of the point at the base of the spine, the tailbone. All of a sudden, there's a space that opens up and the breath can flow more smoothly. And this is when we start to move towards the central channel. But that's due to the alignment, the physical alignment. And then the energy can start to flow more optimally. So that's one thing, crown and tailbone. Now, another thing is to pay attention to the limbs. So, first thing is, what are my knees doing? Okay, and I put my hands on my knees, and what I'll look to do, and this is a very subtle internal energetic, is I move my knees into my hands, kind of push my knees into my hands, and I kind of pull a little bit with my hands on my knees to feel that. And by moving my knees into my hands, it feels like I'm lengthening my thigh bone, and then I can draw my hips into the hip socket. And drawing the hips into the hip socket and lengthening the knees creates space in my lower back, drops my sacrum, opens up the breath, draws the breath down, actually allows me to get deeper with my breath. But we're not finished yet. We have the knees and the hip bones, but now let's pay attention to the shins, energetically moving the shins towards the ankles. And then as the shins move towards the ankles, the feet can light up and be active. So there's a subtle activation through the soles of the feet. The feet aren't just like limply hanging there. They're alive. And this opens up this whole lower area, creating stability, a platform. So I have my knees moving into my hands, my hips moving into the hip sockets, shins moving down towards the ankles, ankles alive. Now let's see what's happening with the arms. So that there's a contraction in the hip and an expansion at the knee down. That cancels out. Now there's the same thing. There's a mirror effect in the upper arm and the lower arm. The upper arm mirrors the thighs. The lower arm mirrors the lower leg. So what do I need to do with my shoulder? I suck my shoulder into the shoulder joint, simultaneously move my forearm towards my wrist. Shoulder into shoulder joint, forearm towards wrist, hip into hip joint, shins towards ankles. And if I do all that right, then my periphery, again, this is very subtle, but my periphery is engaged and it creates space in the center. Crown over tailbone. Shoulders into shoulder joints, forearms to wrists, hips into hip joints, shins to ankles. Tailbone down. And right away, having all of this activation, having the spread into the periphery allows there to be much more space in the center. And I can start to work with new awareness, new territory that wasn't there before. And doing this gradually over time will open up the body, of course, but as the body opens up, this has a direct correlate to the mind. And so we're releasing tension in the body at the same time as releasing tension in the mind. And so I'd like to just use today to review that, to offer that to you so that you can work this into your practice, right? The emphasis on the central column, the emphasis on opening up through the periphery, noticing where the expansion and the contraction is, having them balance each other, having all the limbs synchronized, and therefore breathe in the central channel. And so work that into your sadhana. And in the coming videos, I will continue to expand on these topics. And I hope that this was super helpful for you guys to continue to deepen. This is a ongoing process and a journey. So enjoy, and I will see you soon.